Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's warmer. It was in the 20s earlier today, so now it's about 32, courtesy of Thomas Jefferson, our weatherman. The humidity is 50%, and the wind is 10 miles an hour, but like I said the other day, the fact that these roads are carved into the land a little bit gives you a break against the wind. Not always, but a lot. And now that the trees are basically bare, it's a guess as to how much you can avoid. I don't know if enough of us have focused on the following historic fact, which is that when Hamilton put together a behind closed doors meeting to create the Constitution, many thought that the agenda of that meeting was to revise the Articles of Confederation because they didn't compel the cooperation that was necessary for, well, this young nation perhaps to exist. So they created a constitution behind closed doors, and some of the notes that were taken were not to be revealed for, I don't remember, it was 20 or 40 years, but it was a long time. And the Constitution did not have a Bill of Rights. And Patrick Henry, here in Virginia where I am, and when I ran for office years ago, an old relative of his worked on my campaign. And he gave me such a forceful lecture one day on certain issues, I could almost see Patrick Henry hovering within his DNA. Anyhow, there was no Bill of Rights. Now, it almost overturned the possibility of the Constitution. What was the First Amendment? The First Amendment was freedom of speech and press and assembly, basically access to the government to protect the people from the government if necessary, and to inform the discretion of the elected representatives. And in those days, many more were appointed than elected, because the notion of democracy, small d, hadn't ingrained itself. Now, it's against this background that we have what some might think are loose ends, but I think are germane and central to the disaster and tragedy that is how we've conducted our resistance and illumination of the criminal behavior and character of Trump and his minions. So, for example, we now have cleared the deck in the New York hush money case brought by a county DA, Bragg, and it's before a judge, Judge Merchan. I think it's Juan Merchan. And he has denied motions that the Supreme Court immunity decision has any effect on citizen Trump, if you will, and to the effect that if there's any argument that can be made for any part of this case, there's overwhelming evidence that makes it harmless error, if error at all. There was also a discussion about a juror, but it was not by a juror. It was by some third party, and they didn't submit an affidavit, and the government had a contrary question about it. And so those kinds of motions and arguments were pushed aside. So what's before Judge Merchan now? Is he debating sentencing or not? Now, Trump prefers dismissal. He wants to say the fact that he was elected president is cause enough to dismiss the convictions against him. That's just his gimme, gimme, want thinking. There is no reason in law or the Constitution, state or federal, to do that. The prosecution, mind-numbingly amazing to me, is telling the court, well, you could wait 4 years and then sentence him. Justice delayed his justice denied. Or you, judge, could dismiss it. Wow. There's a range. No president, and we've had some buttes, has ever gone so low and persisted so long doing things that put the nation and our form of government at risk. The law dictates sentencing now. Judge Merchan can expect this will be the first sentence in his obit, however long away from now it may be written. What he does here will mark the man, for any who care, in the years that follow his separation from humanity and death. So, are we going to protect our law and the court by rendering this man who soars above the law, by bringing him down to the citizen he's supposed to be and punishing him as anybody else would be punished? Anybody else. Oh, it's difficult. Really? What is more difficult? Sentencing a man for what he's been convicted, or tolerating more and more violations of law and the Constitution in the days ahead? He won an election jam-packed with lies, with huge amounts of money to buy votes, flooding the airwaves. And I'm saying the Democrats didn't do this as well. But how can you get some sort of precise decision when you mix emotion and false lies? And then take that election and say, this is what it means. It's a mandate for X or Y, as Trump has said. Now, polls have their limitations, obviously. But the public believes Trump continues to violate the law. 54% oppose his programs that threaten democratic norms. And a couple of them are coming right off the calendar. One is Trump's proposal to use the military to oust migrants. The strongest reaction among the public is Trump putting reporters in jail. That is, investigating and prosecuting his enemies. Even Nixon resisted people talking about his enemies list, although it became difficult because it was out there. So it's no mistake that the First Amendment is the First Amendment to the Constitution. The means by which we try to keep the government honest, inform the discretion of our representatives. But where are we? Now, am I speaking a conspiracy theory? No. Trump's going into court. He went into court after ABC, and they ran away from the case like a sick puppy. They had an argument. Their argument was good and true. Why wouldn't it have worked? Why did they cow to him, to Trump? Because they weaken, they weaken their entire argument about being journalists. Light is supposed to defeat the darkness, in this case, of a wannabe tyrant. And so that's what we do. And there are other lawsuits pending. And those who count these things said in the last several weeks before the election, Trump attacked the press more than 100 times. So there's that. Now, let's talk about a couple of the values in our once United States. There's a story today that Biden has issued commutations of those who face a death sentence, with a couple of exceptions. I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with it. Because if you spent a half hour, if you're not yourself a lawyer or a person who's involved in the system, talking to someone who has, you'd know you might just as well throw darts while blindfolded, as expect our system to give justice in the courtrooms. It's such a mix of other values that make alloys of unfair behavior by the court, by the prosecutor, by the rules that govern a case. So, what do we do about that? That's what the pardon is for. To enunciate a value that we can't trust our system to know the difference between innocence and guilt, and there is no coming back from an error when the sentence is execution. Now, another one, and I think that the commentators are just freaking lazy. How could you pardon Hunter Biden? Are you kidding? Did you hear what Trump said he was going to do? What do you think he was going to do? We should rest on his ability to be fair and forego a remedy that would protect us from him going foul. That's what we're dealing with here. So the other pardons, and if I were representing any of these people, I would be making the case to the president, Biden that is, to pardon those who have been identified as the enemies of Trump, like Cheney, for instance, or Schiff, and there are others. My former boss, Zoe Lofgren, perhaps. I don't know. None of these people should have to spend a minute hiring counsel to protect them from frivolous cases and tie them up so they can't fight Trump when he's in office. It is a way to muzzle in opposition to the First Amendment, in opposition to the protections that we have in these amendments to someone like Trump when he comes into office. And consider the scurvy character that he's going to make Attorney General. The Ethics Committee has decided Matt Gaetz had tens of thousands of dollars spent on sex and on drugs. How could he possibly think of himself as a proper elected official when that's what he did? And there's another question here, which is, what the hell was he thinking being involved with a girl of 17 and having sex with her? Now, I think of Garland in this context because the Justice Department, Just Us Department, had this case, looked at it, and did nothing about it. It mirrors their failures on the January 6th committee, who basically said, this is the case. They didn't say it this way, but you fools, why aren't you acting on this? And that's when we had not so special Assistant Smith. I say not so special because he alone, or in conjunction with Garland, is dropping the case. Fight it. Force him to tell you to kill the case. When is a president allowed to fire the person who is bringing the case? I think there was more justice, fairness, and respect being a street kid in the South Bronx than there is in the highest chambers of our government, any branch you want to choose, any elected office you want to choose. I've said it before, these guys and gals will break your heart. They talk in golden, soft-spoken, reassuring, uplifting tones, but their actions are those of a wizard concealing in the springs and mirrors of life what they're really doing. And unless they change, we're going to lose this democracy. We're going to lose this republic. So we need fighting. And it's not politicians pretending to be more Christian. And it's not going to be talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's going to be talking about who is hurt by these policies. How does it look that our nation acts like a dictatorship? You saw, we can't even agree to spend the money to keep the government open. We can't get an agreement there. And the person who has the loudest voice is a gazillionaire. And he has drawn a statement from Trump that Trump is really the president. You see our problem. We're the solution. Because as afraid these people are of losing their jobs because of Republican threats and the president and so forth, President Trump I'm talking about, they're also afraid that we'll cashier them as well. And I think we have to. I think if people are not voting the way they said they would, preserving and protecting us the way they said they would, we should shit can them and not look back. So, that's what I got to say. Merry almost Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and any other holiday season you're celebrating. And so I say goodbye until tomorrow from my Cathedral of Trees. Bye-bye.